Hello again, it's Private Pilot Steve with episode number 2, recorded on October the 12th, 2012. And this is a recording of a flight from Jack Edwards over to Baton Rouge. And I thought I'd take you along and let you at least see what goes on during part of the flight. This particular flight, we were going over for the LSU game. And if you're an LSU fan, things turned out fairly well. If not, you must be a South Carolina fan, and you always have next year. What you're seeing on the screen now are the nice digital displays or glass cockpit that's in the Cessna Corvallis 400. These are G1000 Garmin displays, and they're pretty much the latest in digital technology as far as these type of displays are. The one on the left is called the PFD, or Primary Flight Display, and the one on the right, which is in front of the passenger, is called the MFD, or a Multifunction Display. And as the name suggests, the PFD provides all the primary flight instruments, such as airspeed, altitude, heading, and all of the necessary instruments to maintain flight and flight attitude. The MFD, or multifunction display, can display a variety of things. Mainly is the navigation information from point A to point B. When I enter a flight plan, it'll draw a line between the different points in the flight plan, and if I use the autopilot will do a really good job of staying on that line, better than I can do, and it will fly me direct between each point. If I hand fly, then it's up to myself or the pilot to make sure we stay on course. Also, I can display weather, traffic, engine information, and a variety of other things. And I thought I'd pick out a few screens for you, and we'll go through them one by one and give you an idea of what I'm looking at and what that information means. And we'll go through those now. This current screen, and I'm sorry for the reflections in the screen. When I was using a little handheld camera, I didn't realize they were there. But this particular screen is a picture of the MFD, or multifunction display, showing the moving map with the course line and the airplane on course. Also, right in front of the nose of the airplane, you'll see a little triangle that has +11 on it, and that's part of the traffic display, showing traffic to my left and north of the airplane, and the +11 means he's 1,100 feet above me according to his transponder. And usually when the separation is 1,000 feet or less, then ATC, or air traffic control, will call and tell me I have traffic and want me to visually identify that traffic. And if I tell them I have the traffic in sight, it makes them feel a lot better. Sometimes we're in the clouds and we can't, and then it's up to them to try to keep both of us separated fairly well. In the upper left hand corner of the picture, you can see the manifold pressure and the RPM, and then down to fuel quantity and fuel flow and oil pressure and oil temperature and all the pertinent engine instruments that I need to monitor what's going on with the engine. And it's a smaller display, just one little strip on the left, but it's enough to let me see exactly what's going on. I have a more in-depth display that I'll show you in just a minute of the engine instruments that give me a very good picture of what is happening. This next screen is the PFD, or Primary Flight Display. And as you can see right in the center of the screen there, it's showing my heading 273 degrees westbound. And right above that are some boxes, and if if you'll look back on the moving part of this video, you can see those boxes move, and the airplane flies right through the center of those boxes, and when it does that, it's exactly on course. They're not really that useful, but it just kind of gives you a sense of movement. This particular primary flight display has an option called synthetic vision, and what that means is that the ground is actually drawn digitally onto the display. So you can see I'm going, the green is the terrain and the blue is water, so I'm right along the coast here, heading for Gulfport on my way to Baton Rouge. And when you get out into terrain that is more mountainous, you actually get different colors for the terrain, and it gives you more of a 3D picture of what the terrain underneath you looks like. And like I say, it's a digital representation, so if you're above the clouds or whatever, then that has no bearing. You still see the clear terrain below you. And when you get close to the runway, it actually draws a picture of the runway, and we'll show you that in a future podcast of some landings. And of course, on the left center is the airspeed, 145 knots indicated. The true airspeed, which is calculated automatically for me, is 167 knots. And on the right is my altitude. I flew over at 8,000. So the autopilot's holding exactly on 8,000. A little bit below that is the altimeter setting, 30.21. And then in the bottom left corner of the screen, I have what they call an inset, which is a little bit of the multifunction display's moving map, along with any traffic or weather, would display in that little left box. Just keeps me from having to look over to the right, and everything's kind of right there in front of me. And then the last thing that we'll talk about here is you'll see a little black box kind of in the center left, and it has two arrows, one pointing to the right and it says 8, one pointing up it says 2, and that's actually the winds aloft. So I have a wind out of the south because I'm flying westbound at 8 knots and a tailwind at 2 knots. And so you can see that my true airspeed is 167 and my ground speed, you can't see it in this display, is probably 169 because of the 2-knot tailwind. And I've mentioned the autopilot several times, so here's a display of the autopilot controls, which are located in between the two screens, the PFD and the MFD, right in the center. To the right are the autopilot controls, the button right there in the center labeled AP autopilot, that turns it on and off. And then there's various other buttons there to control different things, and that's probably a podcast in itself. Just to the left of that, the other buttons there are mainly to do with the audio panel in the airplane. It's built-in audio panel. We all wear headsets and they're plugged into this audio panel, and I can decide what radios I want to listen to, and I can control the squelch and who I want to hear out of the 4 passengers. Well, the pilot plus the 3 passengers. I can isolate the back 2 passengers where they can talk to themselves and don't have to hear me, and listen to XM radio and whatever else we want to do. Very, very nice audio panel that handles all of that. There wasn't a lot of weather out today during the flight, but I wanted you to at least see kind of what it looks like. I have what's called XM Weather, which is a subscription service provided by a division of XM Radio, and they broadcast through their satellites all of the weather needed for aviation. And this is not exactly real time. It's delayed somewhat, probably from 5 to 20 minutes, and there's a little display that tells you how old it is, and then the FAA has warned us that it may even be older than that. So it's not used to pick our way like regular radar through weather systems. It's used more as a planning tool to make some decisions long time before you get to the weather as to what you're going to do. And you can see in the right center part of the screen there's some green and yellow, and that depicts some rain that was out there. And it didn't bother me in this particular trip. It was nothing in sight. So it's more enjoyable for sure when there's no weather around. But the XM weather does give you a very secure feeling of what's out there instead of just flying in the blind. And one nice thing about the multifunction display, it really does do a good job of displaying a lot of information. Here's a chart. This is an actual FAA chart of what the Baton Rouge airport looks like, with the different runways and taxiways and pertinent frequencies and altitudes and pretty much everything I need to know when landing at the airport. In addition, it also displays an electronic version of this, which Garmin calls Safe Taxi. It allows me to zoom way down into the taxiways and runways, and as I move the plane around the airport on the ground, I have a GPS representation of where I am, just like you do in your car on the highways. And it makes it a lot safer, because I can tell you, moving around on the ground is a lot harder than flying around in the air as far as navigation. There's a lot going on the airports. It's not very intuitive as to where all those taxiways and runways go. And having Safe Taxi aboard makes it an awful lot easier to go from point A to point B along the airport and find where I need to go. And one final still picture here. This is not any of the displays, but I thought I'd give you a quick look at some of the controls, the engine controls. The black knob on the left is manifold pressure. The center blue knob is prop, and the right side is the mixture. And we adjust all those in flight to get the engine to perform where we expect it to. If you can look a little bit below that, you'll see a digital display, a little green display that says 55F. And that is the air conditioning system in the Cessna Corvallis, which is a built-in factory standard system. And it is great to have air conditioning in this airplane, or in any airplane, general aviation. Most general aviation airplanes do not have air conditioning. And once you get up to altitude, you can figure you're going to lose about 2 degrees per thousand as you climb in altitude. And once you get on up, it's not too bad. But on the ground or on a really hot day at low altitudes, it gets pretty stuffy inside a hot airplane. And so having the air conditioning system like this is really something. It's the first airplane I've owned with air conditioning, and it is definitely a feature that I would not go without again. And hopefully more of the manufacturers will start adding air conditioning to airplanes. Well, we're back to flying again, and I'm flying westbound, and the time over Baton Rouge is probably close to 6 o'clock or so. And as you can see, I can't see the ground. And those aren't really clouds, that's more of a haze buildup. If you look real close, every now and then you will see something on the ground. But I sure couldn't see anything, and I could not see the airport. And the sun was right in my face. I was looking right into it, so I was holding my hand up and trying to block the sun. I don't have a visor or any kind of sun filter on the windshield, so the visibility was very difficult. And when I got to the point, according to the moving map, where I was pretty much over the airport, I told the controller, I am not going to be able to see this airport. Let's go ahead and fly an instrument approach. And what an instrument approach does is the controller is going to give me vectors or headings and degrees to fly. And this particular controller was female, so I'll just say she. So she had me fly pretty much parallel in the opposite direction of the runway I'm going to land on, this particular runway. I'm not real sure. I don't have my logbook in front of me, but I think it was runway 22 right, or either 13. I just don't remember. But anyhow, she is going to take me on a opposite direction, parallel to the runway, several miles. In this case, it was several miles to the right of the runway, and bring me out past what they call the final approach fix, and then turn me towards the artificial center line that comes out from the runway, which on an ILS or instrument landing system is a electronic beacon, and she's going to turn me in towards that point. And when I get fairly close to that artificial center line, then she'll give me a final vector that will turn me to intercept, and at that point she'll give me my clearance, tell me I'm cleared for the ILS, and an altitude to maintain until I capture what's called the glide slope, which is another radio beacon that comes out from the airport that with the instrumentation I have on the airplane, I can tell whether I'm above or below the desired point where I need to be. And as you can see here, I'm skimming across some light clouds. This is not convection weather at all, so it was not bumpy. It was just terrible visibility. Now, if I was coming from the other direction, from west, with the sun to my back, I'm sure I would have seen this airport. Matter of fact, I did look back over my left shoulder passing the airport, and I could see the airport at this point, but it's a lot safer to go ahead and fly this approach. That way I don't get disoriented and I don't lose sight of the airport. I don't have to worry about any of that. I just fly the instruments and make for a much safer ride here. And as you can see, she must have descended me down, and I'm getting below this little haze layer and cloud layer, and that is the Mississippi River down there. And the sun is setting, so I have a really nice sight of the Mississippi going by, and it's a beautiful sunset. And now I can see the ground because I'm below the haze and the sun's not in my face anymore. And at this point, I could have terminated the approach and made a visual approach into the airport, but like I say, it's better to just go on. I'm committed to the approach, to the instrument approach. Let's go ahead and fly it. And she's expecting me to do that, and probably has traffic vectored and stacked up around me anyhow, so no use in changing things right now. It just confuses everybody and makes for a longer flight. Well, it'd actually be a shorter flight if I went straight to the airport at this point, but she may not be expecting that, and may vector me away from the airport and let some other guys that are coming down the instrument landing system, let them get ahead of me. So I just went ahead and just stayed on the approach. And what's nice about the MFD, or multifunction display, that you saw earlier, I have a depiction of everything on that graphical map, so I can pretty much visualize exactly what she's doing as far as taking me out on a parallel track. I can see when I pass the final approach fix, which is usually around 10 miles from the airport, and I know at that point that's about when she's going to start turning me back towards the airport to intercept that glide slope coming back in and localizer coming back in. And as you can see, she gave me my final turn here, and I'm hand flying the airplane at this particular time. I could use the autopilot if I wanted to. The autopilot will fully capture the instrument landing system. It will capture it both laterally, left and right, and vertically on the glide slope, and it will fly it just rock solid all the way down to the runway. But it's a good idea to stay proficient every now and then. The autopilot's known not to work, and it's a good idea to be able to just hand fly the airplane, and that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm watching the needles, and we'll do a podcast at some point where I actually show you the displays while we're flying one of the approaches. I have one of my older podcasts on, but there's no audio that does show a full instrument landing approach, both with what the displays look like and what the outside looks like. And that one was pretty much IFR all the way. I was in the clouds pretty much all the way down to the runway, but I didn't have my second camera set up here, so I wasn't expecting any kind of weather at all. The trip looked complete VFR when I took off, and that's one of the things about general aviation you have to be prepared for also, is that the weather can change and not be what you expect, so you always want to be ready to do what you need. As you can see, because I was hand flying, I was a little bit overshooting the center line there, so I had to go left and then go right, and then once I got on it, it was pretty easy from there. I stayed pretty steady onto it. I could tell you, if I had the autopilot on, it would not have done that. It would have captured it perfectly and flown it perfectly. And now I'm just slowing the airplane down, getting the flaps, first notch of flaps in. We have approach flaps and then landing flaps. And I have to get slowed up to 147 knots or less indicated before I can put in the first notch of flaps. And this particular airplane is all fiberglass, all composite airplane. It's very slick, and it's not the easiest airplane in the world to slow down. As a matter of fact, it has speed brakes that pop up. There's a little switch I can pop them up, and I did use that because I was at 8,000 feet, pretty much almost all the way to the airport, but I used it to get down from altitude, and I didn't need it on the approach. I don't usually use them on the approach. The easiest way to get slowed up for me is just to throttle back and pull the nose up a little bit, and the airplane will bleed off the speed fairly quickly. Getting pretty close now, so I probably at some point here am getting the last notch of flaps in. I have to do that below 107 knots indicated, and try to stay at about 90 knots with the last notch of flaps in until I cross. We call it crossing the fence, or just basically crossing the area that is right in front of the runway. It's usually the cleared area. They always clear the trees and things out in front of the runway. And once I cross that, then I try to come across the runway threshold. Usually the landing point is set back further from the end of the runway, and the threshold at about 80 knots, and from there it's all visual at that point. I'm looking at the runway. I'm not really looking at the instruments anymore. Once you make hundreds and hundreds of landings, you can pretty much go by feel and start pulling the nose up and coming back on the throttle. And what I like to do is just kind of get level with the ground and just let the speed bleed off and let the airplane kind of come down by itself. You can see here, that's pretty much what I'm doing. And then we're down. And at this point, like I said in the prior podcast, that I get the flaps up as quick as I can and pull back on the yoke to try to use my aerodynamic braking to get the airplane stopped without having to touch the brakes. And this airport's not too difficult to find where you're going. I always look on a website and see where the FBOs are, and use Google Maps to kind of get an idea of what the airport looks like, so that I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to go before I get there anyhow. But the tower ground control will usually give you taxi instructions. He'll ask you where you want to go in the airport. This particular airport has 4 or 5 FBOs, and there are some are on the left, some are on the right here. So they'll ask you where you want to go, and I'll kind of tell them, and they'll give me taxi instructions. And this one was pretty easy because I believe it was taxiway Echo towards the end of this runway. It takes you right into the ramp area where these FBOs are. And I couldn't remember exactly where this particular Louisiana aircraft, which is where I was going to. I couldn't remember exactly where they were. There's 3 or 4 of them right in a row here. You can see all the airplanes up there. So what happens is usually they'll be looking for you because they've heard you land. They're listening to the radios. And they'll usually send a guy out in a golf cart, or either a guy in an orange shirt of some kind where you can see him, and he'll be waving his arms and telling you where to park. That's what they're supposed to do anyhow. A lot of them, sometimes I think they're sleeping or not paying attention, and you know, we're coming in and we have no idea where they want us. When that happens to me, I'll just park right in their front door and then let them move the airplane if they don't want it there. But you can see a little golf cart there. I don't know where he was going, but he'll eventually turn around and come back and show me where he wants me. And like I said, I was heading to the front door anyhow, because if they're not out there, that's where I'm parking. Well, once again, I'm about to wrap this one up. If you have any questions, please feel free questions on the website, and I'll be glad to try to answer them the best I can. Take care, and we'll see you on the next podcast.